the United Nations have seized the initiative. Out on the desert fringe of inhabited Egypt began perhaps the decisive battle of the war. Air Vice Marshal Cunningham and General Montgomery, on the right, had planned perfect Army-Air Force cooperation. Every tank that could be pressed into service was got ready. Almost alone, the Middle East Command knew that a tremendous prize could be grasped by an all-out offensive, punched home with the full weight of the heavily reinforced striking power of the 8th Army. Desert rations, water, fuel, and ammunition were laid in. It may have been that the rank and file could no more guess than we at home that the coming battle would put to rout the general who ranked second to none in the German army. Success had escaped us too often before. It was to be a night attack. In the day's dying light, the bombers mocked the enemy's defense in depth, flew far over his lifeline communications, their target, his radio location and main telephone exchange, two deadly thrusts at Rommel's nerve centers as the roar of the massed guns crashed into ear-splitting prophecy of his coming doom. Photographically prolonging the split-second gun crashes, these pictures show how the opening bombardment turned the night blackness into almost day. They convey also something of the terror of night attack to an army taken by surprise. In the first morning hours, new waves of bombers flew over the 8th Army's attacking columns to targets far behind Rommel's line. Never before was air power used by the British with anything like comparable effect. Never before had we employed such weight of material on the ground. In the main, British material from our own factories, made for the Middle East by titanic efforts since the near disasters of the previous campaign. It was the swift destruction of his armor that overwhelmed Rommel. Hundreds of direct hits by tank, gun, and bomber almost magically transformed the situation in Egypt. And always air power, here fully displayed by the United Nations for the first time on the battlefield, pursued the now demoralized army, routing the fleeing remnants of his army. Bombers unleashed their annihilating force as never before. The weapon in which the Nazis gloried when they enjoyed its monopoly boomeranged against them. Rommel's retreating survivors must have cursed the day the aeroplane was invented. The localized battle which began in Egypt was the prelude to an African campaign. American landings in Northwest Africa make complete Mediterranean control a near future possibility. Under the supreme command of General Eisenhower, the expeditionary force was perfectly planned and directed. Tank expert, only 52, Eisenhower looks every inch the man for the job. Of several landings on the Atlantic coast, the most notable was at Casablanca, important seaport and second city in Morocco. It carries in peacetime a thriving trade. In wartime, in German hands, its excellent harbor sheltered U-boats, which menaced transatlantic shipping and the route round the Cape. Vichy troops resisted the landing near Casablanca, though less determinedly than was expected. A fine port is lost to the Axis, gained by the United Nations. A significant Mediterranean landing was at Oran. the naval base where we battered Vichy warships more than 2 years ago. The fate of the surviving men of war may be influenced by the action of their former commander. Now in U.S. hands, Admiral Darlan may break with Vichy and so sway the French Navy. Since Laval's return to the puppet government, Darlan has resentfully been forced to take a back seat. The doddering Pétain now takes command of all Vichy's armed forces. But when he made that decision, he was at Vichy. It was Darlan who sanctioned the surrender of Algiers, capital of Algeria. Under the wise and tolerant colonial government of peacetime France, Algiers grew and prospered. The United Nations hold it in trust for return to France after the war. North African supplies will no longer be a gaping hole in our blockade. Iron ore, magnesium, 400,000 tons of fruit, and 100,000 sheep used to nourish the Nazi war effort every year. Potentially Hitler's to exploit had he conquered North Africa, were the 400,000 men serving under the Vichy colors. Behind these soldiers were millions of colored men whom the Nazis could have made into cannon fodder. The Allies' next step is through Tunisia to the ports of Bizerta and Tunis, ports from which we shall now dominate the Sicilian Narrows. If all goes well, the Mediterranean will henceforth be our lake. Between Bizerta, finest harbor on this coast, and Sicily, is the channel much dreaded by convoys which had to force their way through en route to Malta. From now on, we bar that channel to the Axis. Tunis is little more than 200 miles from the airfields of Sicily, stronghold of the Luftwaffe. In our hands, Tunis will give Nazis in Sicily unmistakable notice to quit. German and Vichy propaganda declares that the United Nations plan to keep these African territories after the war. Nothing is further from the truth. Before long, the ranks of fighting France may be swelled by troops whom the Allied Expeditionary Force and the Eighth Army have now rescued from the threat of slavery under Hitler. Into the rapidly filling prison compounds came Nazis and Italians who have themselves been Hitler's slaves. Interrogation revealed that the Germans in Egypt were all but destroyed as a fighting army. Events had breathlessly taken a turn which only a few days before, the least responsible optimist dared not have predicted. Modern history does not provide another example of so rapid a transformation of the military scene. General Montgomery realized that, to be fully exploited, the first blows must be followed up. At all costs, the enemy must be denied the time to stop and reform. The sustained attack, perhaps the hardest of tactical operations, was brilliantly carried out by RAF, no less than Army. Offensive phase, the Eighth Army dealt a death blow at the whole Nazi regime. At last, the floodgates are open. The irresistible might of the United Nations pours through. Historians of the war may say that Hitler's mad aspirations were buried under the wind-blown sand of the Western Desert.